In the quiet suburbs of Orinda, California, a chilling story of love control and betrayal unfolded, one that blurred the line between therapy and obsession. It began in the late 1970s when 15-year-old Susan May Bowling was sent to therapy for anxiety and depression. Her therapist was Dr. Felix Polk, a respected psychologist nearly 30 years older. What started as therapy soon turned into something else, a secret affair between a teenager and the man meant to heal her. Years later, Susan and Felix would marry, build a family, and appear to have it all: 3 sons, wealth, and success. But behind closed doors, the marriage was toxic. Susan claimed Felix was abusive and manipulative. Felix told friends Susan was unstable and dangerous. In 2002, after 24 years of marriage, the tension finally exploded. Police arrived at the Polk home to find Felix dead in the guest house, stabbed multiple times with a kitchen knife. Susan claimed it was self-defense, that Felix had attacked her. Prosecutors said it was murder, the calculated act of a woman who'd spent decades spinning lies. This is the story of Susan Polk, the woman who fell in love with her therapist and ended up killing him. Born Susan May Bowling. Classification: murderer. Characteristics: Polk claims she stabbed her abusive husband in self-defense. Number of victims: 1. Date of murder: October 14, 2002. Date of arrest: next day. Date of birth: January 25, 1957. Victim profile: Dr. Frank Felix Polk, 70. Her husband. Method of murder: stabbing with knife. Location: Orinda, Contra Costa, County, California, USA. Status: sentenced to prison for a term of 16 years to life on February 23, 2007. Susan Polk, born Susan May Bowling in 1957, is an American woman convicted in June 2006 of second-degree unpremeditated murder for the 2002 death of her husband, Dr. Frank Felix Polk. Polk's trial, described by one Associated Press correspondent as circus-like, drew extensive media attention with its sensationalist elements. Background: Polk met Dr. Polk, a psychotherapist, in 1972, when administrators at her high school recommended she see him to treat her panic attacks. Polk later claimed that Dr. Polk first had sex with her when she was 16, and still under his treatment a taboo and professionally unethical relationship between therapist and patient that is now illegal in California. At the time, Dr. Polk had a wife and 2 children, though that couple subsequently divorced in 1982. After graduating high school, Polk attended Mills College and San Francisco State University before, in 1982, marrying Dr. Polk, who was then an instructor at the California Graduate School of Family Psychology and an occasional consultant, as well as a private practitioner. At the time of their wedding, Polk was 24 and her husband 50. During their marriage, the couple had 3 sons. In 2001, Dr. Polk filed for divorce, a complicated and contentious proceeding during which each contacted police with allegations of domestic violence. In 2002, after Dr. Polk claimed that Susan had abandoned him, the courts granted Dr. Polk sole custody of the couple's minor son, Gabriel Polk, and sharply reduced Susan's alimony. Dr. Polk also won sole possession of their house. Police records indicate that Dr. Polk reported threats from his wife. On Wednesday, October the 9th, Polk went to the home to retrieve her belongings and complete her dental procedure by having a permanent crown put on her tooth. That Friday, October 11th, the eldest son, Adam, came home from UCLA to pick up his dog. The following day, Sunday, October 13th, Dr. Polk, Adam, and the youngest son, Gabriel, drove Adam and the dog back to UCLA. Dr. Polk and Gabriel returned home at around 9:30 p.m. Dr. Polk, then 70, was found dead the next day, Monday, October 14th, 2002. Dr. Polk had 27 wounds on his body, including 15 stab wounds and evidence of blunt force trauma. Polk, too, was cut and scratched and had red discoloration around her eyes, bite marks on the hand, and a red welt on her shoulder. The trial. At trial, prosecutors sought a conviction of murder in the first degree, contending that Susan Polk planned the murder of her multi-millionaire husband for money. Susan Polk first denied knowledge of or involvement in Felix Polk's death, and then claimed self-defense, asserting that after years of beating and sexually abusing her, he brandished a kitchen knife against her. She stated that she took control of the weapon and stabbed him instead. As an expert witness for the defense forensic pathologist Dr. John Cooper testified that Felix Polk's death was caused by heart disease and that his stab wounds were not life-threatening and were evidence that Susan Polk delivered them in self-defense. Dr. Cooper failed to appear in court the following day to continue being cross-examined and to present documents he claimed to have received from Susan Polk, sending a written explanation to the judge. He returned with the letters a week later to resume testimony. Prosecuting attorneys dismissed Susan Polk's claim, arguing that she had no defensive wounds from her husband's alleged attack. The court was forced to declare a mistrial when the wife of Susan Polk's then-counsel Daniel Horowitz was murdered in an unrelated incident. Susan fired her attorneys to represent herself. She supported her defense with allegations of a history of marital and professional misconduct, including claims that Dr. Felix Polk had drugged and raped her when she was a teenager, brainwashed the couple's children, and threatened to kill her if she tried to leave him. She also claimed to be a psychic with foreknowledge of the September 11th attacks that could have been used to thwart the attacks if her husband hadn't prevented her from alerting authorities, asserting that her husband was an Israeli spy who was passing her psychic prediction to Mossad. Susan Polk repeatedly requested a second mistrial, lodging accusations of conspiracy against the prosecutor and the judge. During her closing statements, Susan Polk, who had refused to pursue a line of defense based on mental illness, questioned whether public perception that she was delusional was coloring opinions of her guilt. Each of Susan and Felix's children testified at the trial. The youngest son, Gabriel, who had found the body, testified that his mother had speculated about means of killing her husband in the weeks before his father's death. The oldest son, Adam, also testified against his mother receiving widespread media coverage when he referred to her on the stand as cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. The middle son, Eli, testified on Susan's behalf that Felix was the unstable parent. Jurors disagreed that the crime was premeditated, finding her guilty of second-degree murder. Sentenced to prison for a term of 16 years to life, Polk's conviction is on appeal. She will be eligible for parole in 2017. Susan Polk was transferred to the California Institution for Women, CIW, a dorm-like prison in Corona near Chino, CA, December 2012. Susan Polk, born Susan May Bolling in 1958, was a housewife and mother of three, who ultimately admitted to and was convicted of murdering her husband, Dr. Frank Felix Polk. Dr. Polk was a prominent Berkeley psychologist who was found with numerous stab wounds in the pool house at the couple's upscale Orinda, California home in 2002. Susan Polk, a self-proclaimed psychic and believer of fairy tales, left the mutilated body of Felix Polk for her youngest son to find. She denied involvement in the murder until confronted with evidence, and then she insisted that she was the victim of a vast conspiracy by her children. Her mother, the police, the forensic scientists, the judiciary, the district attorney's office, her lawyers and her husband's lawyers, and an inexhaustible list of others. Her bizarre defense and her disturbing antics during her trial led to a media sensation. Background. In 1972, Susan Bolling was a troubled student growing up in suburbs of Oakland, California. Her parents were divorcing, and her mother wondered if Susan was trying to shut out the emotional turmoil of the divorce. Later, a school counselor at Clayton Valley High School in Concord, California, recommended therapy for Susan after she refused to attend classes and began making preposterous claims regarding her parents. He suggested an expert in adolescent behavior, Felix Polk. Life with Felix Polk. Felix Polk began treating Susan in 1972 when she was 15 years old. Within a year, however, the doctor-patient relationship changed. After murdering Felix by then, her husband, some 30 years later, Susan would claim that Felix had drugged and raped her, a part of her campaign to denigrate Felix to bolster her bizarre defense. Felix was at that time a married father of 2. Susan went to Mills College, an all-women's school nestled in the Oakland Hills, before moving to San Francisco State University, from which she graduated. She stopped seeing Felix as a therapist, but the personal relationship continued. Unfortunately, however, Susan's mental problems had not resolved. In 1982, Polk divorced his wife, prominent concert pianist Sharon Mann, and married Susan, a woman literally half his age, who could physically threaten Felix. After murdering her husband, Susan would claim that he was a domineering and manipulative husband, obsessed with controlling her life. During her trial, however, no evidence nor eyewitness accounts supported Susan's allegations. However, Susan's own children and police reports filed during the marriage showed that Susan was an abusive spouse and batterer. Susan and Felix eventually had 3 sons, Gabriel, Eli, and Adam. 2 of the children testified that Susan was mentally unstable and habitually spoke of murdering their father. Also during her trial, Susan's unnaturally close relationship with her son Eli raised many concerns and questions of a possible incestuous relationship. In 2001, Susan Polk filed for divorce. Susan had abandoned her children, her husband, and her home, and she was looking for a place to live in Montana. Felix Polk went to court and was awarded custody of their youngest son and retained exclusive control of the house. Upon hearing of the court judgment, Susan Polk returned illegally, broke into Felix Polk's Orinda home, and threatened Felix and her son. Incredibly, Susan moved Felix's possessions to the cottage and took up residence in the home. Felix would tell police and friends that he was afraid of his wife and that she had threatened to kill him. A few weeks later, Felix was murdered by his wife, who left the body for her youngest son to find. Conviction. Susan Polk has been convicted of second-degree murder for the October 13, 2002 death of her husband in a cottage on the couple's $2 million estate in Orinda, California. She faces 16 years to life in prison. Prosecutors argued that the killing of Felix Polk was a cold, calculated attempt by his wife to gain control of his multi-million-dollar estate. When Susan Polk permitted others to represent her, the defense attorneys argued that Susan Polk had long been controlled, abused and battered by her husband, although these claims have never been substantiated and were contradicted by the couple's children and acquaintances, and she acted in self-defense when he flew into a rage and attacked her. While representing herself, Susan Polk made outrageous, unsubstantiated claims, endless recriminations, tales of conspiracy psychics, fairy tales, and secret government agents. Susan's former defense attorney, Daniel Horowitz, claimed that she had long been a battered wife under the physical and emotional control of her husband. Trial. Susan Polk was originally released on bail, however it was subsequently revoked when she violated the terms of her bail by contacting and threatening one of her sons. Polk has remained in custody since that time. The trial began on October 17, 2005, but was declared a mistrial because of the slaying of Pamela Vitale, the wife of her lead attorney, Daniel Horowitz. On January 20, 2006, a judge removed her lawyer, Daniel Horowitz, after he said he had a conflict of interest. Polk, who has fired 3 other attorneys who have represented her, said recently that she wanted Horowitz off her case. On January 31, 2006, after a 2-hour hearing, Judge Laurel Brady set Polk's trial date for February 27, 2006. Polk began to demonstrate her instability when she fired a succession of attorneys and demanded that she be permitted to represent herself. Polk was later allowed to serve as her own attorney. On February 27, 2006, jury selection began in a jury assembly room where 300 prospective jurors arrived. Judge Laurel Brady has said the trial may last as long as 2.5 months. On March 7, 2006, prosecutor Paul Sequeira gave his opening statement in what would prove to be a high-profile trial with spectators, TV legal analysts and reporters showing up at a Martinez Califf courtroom to watch the spectacle of Polk representing herself and repeatedly bickering with the judge and prosecutor. Polk's delusional and confrontational behavior was on full display, with daily recriminations leveled at the judge, the prosecutor, and anyone else who would contradict her. Polk maintained her contention that there was a vast web of conspiracy seeking her conviction, that the crime scene had been tampered with, and that her husband was a vile man, and she was justified in murdering him. Susan Polk also claimed that she was a psychic who predicted the September 11, 2001 attacks, that her husband was a secret Israeli spy, that fairy tales are true, and other equally sensational claims. Those who couldn't attend the trial in person would follow the case daily on various internet websites and legal talk shows on TV. Adding to the drama was testimony against Polk by 2 of her sons, Adam and Gabriel, and testimony on her behalf by her second son, Eli. Adam and Gabriel, the son whom Susan let find his father's mutilated body, described Susan as an angry, delusional, and violent person. The testimony by Eli bordered on the bizarre and provided a window for people to observe the unnaturally close relationship between Susan Polk and her son, leading many to speculate about an incestuous relationship between the two. On May 17, 2006, Polk began testifying in a narrative format. On May 24, 2006, Eli Polk was convicted by a jury of misdemeanor battery against an ex-girlfriend, violating a restraining order and violating probation in connection with 2 arrests in March at the home where his father died. On May 25, 2006, the prosecutor began cross-examining Polk. On June 12, 2006, both sides gave their closing arguments to the jury. On June 16, 2006, Susan Polk was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury would later comment that neither Susan Polk nor her son Eli were credible witnesses, and they completely dismissed her unsubstantiated attacks on her husband's character. Following her conviction, numerous attorneys declined to represent Polk before her sentencing, citing their unavailability. Point Richmond attorney Linda Fullerton has tentatively agreed to represent her pre-sentencing. On January 30, 2007, a motion for a new trial, motion to modify verdict, was filed in the Contra Costa Superior Court. The motion claims that Judge Laurel Brady allowed prosecutor Paul Sequeira to illegally dismiss prospective jurors because they were women, that members of the jury were prejudiced against Polk because of the extensive media coverage of the case, much of it critical of Polk, that there is evidence that the jurors were exposed to media coverage of the trial, and in fact one juror told reporters immediately after the verdict was read, sometimes the media was making stuff up, that Brady improperly reprimanded Polk in front of jurors and appeared to favor the prosecution, that Judge Brady failed to instruct the jury on heat of passion voluntary manslaughter, and that Polk's right to represent herself was hampered by her treatment at the jail, and by the claim that on several occasions she was prevented from consulting with an attorney and her legal assistant. On February 23, 2007, the motion for a new trial, motion to modify verdict, was argued by both the defense and prosecution. The motion was denied, and Mrs. Polk was immediately sentenced to 16 years to life. Wife gets 16 years for killing husband. Feb 24, 2007. Martinez. Califf. A woman who fatally stabbed her millionaire psychotherapist husband, whom she met as a 14-year-old girl in treatment, was sentenced Friday to 16 years to life in prison for murder. Susan Polk received the maximum sentence after acting as her own lawyer in a trial permeated with theatrics, including discussion of her psychic powers and cross-examination of her own sons. An attorney representing her Friday said she planned to appeal. The 49-year-old suburban housewife was convicted in June of second-degree murder in the October 2002 killing of Felix Polk, 70, at the couple's home in Orinda, a wealthy town east of San Francisco. Dressed neatly in a pair of khaki pants and a pink cotton sweater, Polk did not appear surprised by the sentence. Earlier, she told the court she was prepared to go to prison and intended to be productive for however long she was there. "I won't be able to bake cookies, but maybe I'll write a couple of good stories," she said. Polk said she killed her husband in self-defense after years of abuse and said authorities fabricated and suppressed evidence in the case. She testified that she seized a kitchen knife from her husband during an attack near their swimming pool and used it to stab him. But prosecutors said she had no wounds to indicate she was protecting herself, and Felix Polk had more than a dozen stab wounds. Polk said her husband began abusing her while she was his teenage therapy patient and argued that should be a mitigating factor in her sentencing. Her mother, Helen Bolling, told the court that her daughter deserved compassion, considering she has been in prison since she was 14 years old. But Judge Laurel Brady said the relationship, although problematic, should not be considered in her sentencing because it was not the issue the jury determined at trial. Jurors in the case did not find Polk credible, and one referred to her as delusional. While testifying, Polk discussed secret government experiments and claimed that her psychic powers enabled her to predict the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on World Trade Center, but said her husband prevented her from alerting authorities. Under cross-examination from his mother, Adam Polk said she was bonkers and cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, referring to a breakfast cereal catchphrase. Friday, he told his mother that he did not know if he would ever be able to forgive her. "If he were here today, he would want you to find the best head doctor in the business and get help," he said. Polk's lawyer, Linda Fullerton, said there are strong grounds for appeal. The trial was tainted by Polk's own representation and her tense interactions with Brady, who frequently admonished her from the bench, the attorney said. Polk will be eligible for parole after about 12 years because she has already served more than 3 years in jail. But a prosecutor was skeptical that Polk would ever be released. "She will have to earn her way out, and the chances of that are slim," Paul Sequeira said. "She has no remorse. She is still defiant, and I think she will be until she draws her last breath." Jurors find California housewife Susan Polk guilty of murdering her husband. June 19, 2006. Martinez, Calif. After nearly 4 months of often bizarre testimony and vociferous courtroom altercations, a jury found housewife Susan Polk guilty of second-degree murder in the stabbing death of her psychologist husband. Polk, 48, was arrested in October 2002 after her 70-year-old husband Felix was found stabbed to death with a paring knife on the floor of a poolside cottage on the couple's $185 million Orinda, Calif. property. Polk, whose courtroom demeanor was often characterized by angry outbursts against the prosecutor and judge, showed no emotion when the court clerk read the verdict. She asked that the jury be polled and calmly listened as each panelist affirmed the guilty verdict. Her sons, Gabriel, 19, and Adam, 23, who testified against her, sat in the front row and did not look at their mother or express any emotion when the verdict was announced. After the jurors were excused, after her sons left the courtroom, and after the judge announced, "We are in recess," Polk broke down in sobs and hugged her case manager, Valerie Harris. Polk's son, Eli, 21, testified in her defense, but was not present Friday because he is currently serving a 9-month jail sentence for misdemeanor battery. "We all lose here. Felix is no longer in our lives, and we miss him terribly." Adam Polk later read from a prepared statement from the family and Felix's 2 children from a previous marriage. Polk, who represented herself at trial, requested the appointment of a state public defender to help her prepare motions for an appeal. There has been evidence throughout this trial of suppression of evidence by the county, Polk said. Polk was also found guilty of the special enhancement of using a knife in the act of murder. She will be sentenced to 16 years to life in prison for the two convictions as early as July 14th. Prosecutors argued that Polk killed her husband at the end of a contentious divorce when she realized she was losing Gabriel the house and a significant portion of her spousal support. Polk initially denied knowledge of Felix's death, but later claimed she stabbed him in self-defense after he attacked her first with the blade. Her medical expert testified that Felix died from a heart attack during the altercation and not his multiple stab wounds. "We didn't think Susan was credible," jury foreperson Lisa Christwell told reporters afterward. "We didn't believe it was self-defense in any way." Jurors said that Polk's erratic and confrontational demeanor in court did not affect their opinion. "Although it was painful at times to go through that," said juror number 1, Pat Rowland. Jurors called Polk extremely smart and noted that because she acted as her own attorney, they were able to get to know her. They agreed she would have benefited from having counsel, but said it would not have affected their decision. Polk's unreasonable account of the events that transpired on the night of the attack, the fact that she destroyed evidence and denied involvement in his death, and her lack of injuries when compared to her husband's multiple stab wounds and blunt force head trauma, greatly weighed on their decision, jurors said. They also relied on Gabriel's testimony. "We found him very credible and he was the first one on the scene," said juror Bob Borkenhagen. Before his father's death, Gabriel testified. His mother talked about drugging Felix and throwing him in the pool, hitting him with her car, or shooting him. Gabriel found his father's lifeless body on October 14, 2002, called 911 and turned his mother into police. Adam testified that his mother was the embodiment of evil. Eli testified that his father was unstable and violent, but the jurors said they felt Eli's testimony was coached by his mother. Adam and Gabriel both testified that Polk is delusional. "That's a tough one," juror Christwell said when asked if the panel thought Polk suffered delusions. "I think she spent a lot of time telling us she's not delusional." The many lies told. Susan met Felix at 14 when he was her therapist and married him at 24. During 16 weeks of trial, jurors heard bizarre testimony from the defendant about psychic secret agents and the daily physical abuse she claimed to have endured during the Polk's 30-year relationship. Polk spent 9 days on the stand claiming Felix drugged and raped her as a teen, poisoned the family dogs, and plotted the 1978 assassination of San Francisco Mayor George Moscone. Polk told jurors that Adam and Gabe had been brainwashed by her husband and had turned against her because they were part of a conspiracy to loot the family estate. Jurors said they focused on Adam and Gabe's account of their father. "We thought we were able to understand who Felix was," said Rowland. "The letter he wrote to Gabe was very moving." "It's been painful to stand by and listen to the many lies told about Felix," Adam said. "He was not a violent man. He did not abuse his children. He was not the controlling and manipulative individual that Susan portrayed him to be." Polk also called a psychic detective to the stand in an attempt to lend credibility to her own claims to be a medium. She said her husband was a secret Israeli intelligence agent who hypnotized her into trances to glean her predictions and feed them to the Mossad. Felix threatened to kill their children and their pets, Polk said, if she ever left him or divulged what she knew about him. Polk told jurors she refused to undergo a psychological evaluation and denied suffering from delusions. An expert on domestic violence testified that Polk appeared to be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder due to her husband's abuse, but that she was not delusional. Polk faced serious challenges being an in-custody defendant acting as her own attorney. But she made forceful objections in court, pored over case law, and never backed down from an argument. But the thin, grey-haired defendant with the meek voice and acid tongue was often her own worst enemy at trial. Polk called the prosecutor an immoral creep, a lying, deceitful man, and a PE major. "She's hateful," Assistant District Attorney Paul Sequeira told reporters. "I have prosecuted many heinous criminals, and she's not in that group. But I've never gone against anybody so hateful." The judge admonished Polk numerous times for her constant disregard for the court's rulings. Her daily allegations of misconduct and bias lobbed at the judge, the deputies, the clerk, the court reporter, and the cross-examination of her own son Gabriel, which the judge warned was bordering on the abusive. Polk's character assassination of her dead husband did not impress jurors either. "He deserved justice," Christwell said. "We did not see any evidence of abuse or battery on his part." "I'm ecstatic," Sequeira told reporters after the verdict, adding later, "If I'm fortunate, I'll go back one time for sentencing, and that will be the last time I see her." Woman whose lawyer's wife was murdered wants to defend herself. Jan. 13, 2006. A California woman whose murder trial was halted when her defense lawyer's wife was found murdered told a judge Friday that she wants to fire her attorneys and defend herself instead. Susan Polk, who claims she stabbed her abusive husband in self-defense in 2002, told Contra Costa County Superior Court Judge Laurel Brady that her high-profile attorney, Daniel Horowitz, has been inattentive to her case since he found his wife's body upon returning home from work, October 19. Polk charged that Horowitz was making himself available for media interviews, but failed to file new pre-trial motions and issue subpoenas in connection with her trial, which is set to start anew Jan. 31. Horowitz said Friday afternoon that he had issued more than 40 subpoenas on Polk's behalf and was prepared to defend her to his fullest if Brady does not grant Polk's request. "One of her complaints was that I don't visit her enough," Horowitz said. Although she did not raise it in court during a 90-minute hearing, Polk told several San Francisco Bay Area media outlets that a conflict of interest may have arisen between her and Horowitz concerning the murder of his wife Pamela Vitale. Polk told reporters, according to published reports, that she believes Horowitz may have been involved in his wife's slaying. She believed things Horowitz said to her could be used to defend the teenage neighbor charged with Vitale's murder. Horowitz said a gag order imposed in connection with his wife's murder bars him from commenting on Polk's claim. It is not the first time Polk has sought to represent herself. Before the start of her first trial, Polk fired her attorneys and planned her own defense. Horowitz and attorney Ivan Golder took over the defense in late summer and were in the process of attacking evidence that she intentionally killed Felix Polk when Vitale's murder forced a mistrial. Brady reserved decision on Polk's request to discharge Horowitz and Golder until January 20. Brady so far has not acted on Polk's request that Brady and every other judge in Contra Costa County be barred from presiding over the trial because of bias. Polk is charged with first-degree murder in connection with the October 13, 2002 death of her 70-year-old husband in a cottage on the couple's $2 million estate in Orinda, Calif. She claims she stabbed the victim with a paring knife after he attacked her. In 2006, after a sensational trial where Susan Polk defended herself, a jury found her guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison. During the trial, Susan accused everyone, her husband, her lawyers, even the judge, of conspiring against her. She claimed she was the real victim trapped in a web of manipulation and fear. Her sons were divided. One defended her, another testified against her. The courtroom became a family battlefield live on national TV. To this day, Susan insists she acted in self-defense, that Felix was the abuser. But prosecutors and the jury saw something else control ego and revenge. It began as therapy. It ended in tragedy, because when love turns to power and power turns to fear, someone always gets hurt.